If you grew up in America like me, your understanding of World War I is probably quite limited, especially if you're just drawing off of what you were taught in history class. I remember that I kind of drew the parallels between Nazi Germany and the German Empire, especially with those big propaganda posters depicting the Great German War Machine. Did you know that states like Indiana also banned the usage of German outright? So you can't say Gesundheit when someone sneezes or you might get locked up. It's pretty clear that the parallels are drawn between the German Empire and the First World War, with the erratic, evil Kaiser and the Nazi regime in the Second World War and Hitler. Both kill indiscriminately. Both wars were started there with their designs, firstly by an invasion of Belgium and then an invasion of Poland 25 years later. So obviously, in this story, they're the villains. No. The Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark is what we're talking about today. It's a deep dive into the July crisis of 1914. That's the month or so after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the heir of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as well as a look into the conditions that brought the July crisis into existence, from the Agadir up to the Balkan Wars, and even to people putting on their boots, getting ready to march. This book was very good and very illuminating and shattered the story that I thought I knew about World War I. I am no historian, but I do love history, and this book was a fantastic and expansive work of scholarship, and I put emphasis on the expansive. These margins in this book are very small. There is a lot of information. It's a weighty son of a bitch, and it took me about a month to get through, but it was totally worth it. So in this video, I would just like to talk about some of the things that I found interesting, some key takeaways, some things that I found were contrary to what I thought I knew about the First World War and what I was taught, and also some things that run parallel to our world today. Our world right now is a lot closer to 1914 than you might think. And I just like to talk about that. I'm probably not going to get close. My knowledge of the wartime period is kind of sparse, so I'm only going to be covering the pre-war period that is covered in this book. And also writing the script, I realized that I'm pretty out of depth in the subject, so we'll just try our best today. One thing I would like to say is that everyone makes it out of this book worse, besides Austria, Hungary, and Germany, the main central powers in this book. The Ottomans get very little time on page. They have a few passing appearances, specifically about their dreadnoughts that they bought from Britain and their fleet in the Mediterranean, and then the march on Constantinople by the Bulgarians in the Balkan Wars. Otherwise, not really a whole lot is said about the Ottomans, so you kind of just spend a whole lot of time with the Austrians, Germans, and the Entente. But back to the point. You spend your whole life thinking that these Entente powers are like righteous men standing up for democracy because we're looking through the lens after post-World War II, where democracy was at stake, but that's actually not true. In this book, it clearly covers that the initial promptings and the outbreak of the First World War, especially from the French and Russian point of view, is a predetermined plan that was going to happen eventually. It's an imperialist war, and it was drawn from the belief that the Germans were pulling the strings of the Austrians. So very interesting, and this narrative carries on into the future because that's what I believed. The French and Russians actually do not make it out of this book looking very good. Chris Clark mentions that France and Russia's alliance was built to kind of box in the new state of Germany due to their fears of the rising power. France also has a lot of money tied into Serbia, which is another reason why they went to war in the first place. Russia is playing a role like the Balkan Mama, with their kind of vehement stance to protect or control the areas of the Balkans. And they have a lot of skin in the game with Serbia's irredentist movement, so I'd like to talk about that really quick first. The Serbians actually remind me a lot of kind of like Al-Qaeda and the Middle Eastern states of the early 2000s that America went to war with. They're fighting against the Western power with the state-sponsored terrorist groups. It's kind of an open secret that they're supporting them. In Serbia at the time, the parliament is split between the Radical Party and the Independent Radicals, which is an even more radical group that's split off from the original one. I think if your government's controlled by two radical parties, your state's probably not very healthy. And the kicker is that a lot of these people are either involved with or very buddy-buddy with a group called the Black Hand, who orchestrated the murder of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand on the 28th of June. So essentially, Serbia is run by a deep state of Pan-Slavists. And the Pan-Slavists are a group of people who want to unite all the Slavs into one greater Serbia. The Serbs, the Serbo-Croats, the Serb-Mohammedans, which I guess are like Bosnian Muslims, everything. Groups like the Black Hand or the Serbian National Defense have thousands of members at the time who established espionage networks across the Balkan states. They lobbied governments like the Austro-Hungarian and the Russians. They assassinated anyone who was standing in the way, specifically Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And they're particularly pissed off about Austria's acquiring of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Their main enemy is the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as I mentioned before. They're led by the old-ass Franz Joseph. Austria-Hungary is widely believed by many of the characters in this book to be declining, even though their economy rose 4% year by year prior to 1914. They're a lot like the United States, a multi-ethnic society with Austrians and Magyars and Slavs and Croats and Germans and Italians and Poles and everybody. This comparison was actually not lost on Theodore Roosevelt, who mentioned that they're a lot like America and that the Habsburg monarchy understood how to treat the different nations and religions on an equal footing, and thereby achieving great successes, adding that the United States had a lot to learn from Austria with the US's occupation of the Philippines. Yes, you could, Teddy. The Austrians seemed to deal pretty even-handedly with their minority groups within and outside of their empire, though everyone kind of viewed them as a hostile state, strung by the puppet master Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. What you'll learn later in this book is that this actually is not true. In fact, Germany held out till the last minute to go to war for Austria-Hungary, with their hand actually being forced by the mobilization of Russian troops. Germany kind of played a game of catch-up with the other European powers, being only founded in 1871. By the time 1914 rolls around, Germany industrialized so much that a product that is labeled made in Germany actually had the same detestable quality as a red-blooded American right now seeing his favorite hat is actually made in China. From the Bismarck area to Bethmann-Hollweg, Germany did not aspire to found a global empire, and they kind of played in between the margins of the imperialist powers of Britain and France and Russia. Sure, they militarized heavily. Notably, they actually began a naval arms race with Great Britain, who was the great fleet power of the time, which they lost, and they actually released a press release that they had lost, so kind of humiliating. Sure, some of the cabinet members, specifically Helmut von Moltke, the younger, had a hankering to battle it out with the other powers, and actually later on I'll mention that he was so pissed about it, but there have been little to no substantial evidence that Germany was actually planning for a world war, nor that they were actually planning for a war at all and pulling the strings of Austria-Hungary to forge a false flag to start it. All of the major powers in Europe kind of look at Germany as a nouveau riche, the new kid on the block with some bad social cues. The Kaiser is actually a really good representation of this because he is that. He's a kind of grown-up man-child. He's got mommy issues. He's not the bloodthirsty warlord that a lot of people would describe him as. He's just kind of silly. He's my favorite character in this book. And when Serbia responded to Austria's ultimatum in the later days of 1914, Kaiser Wilhelm actually sued for peace on the margins of the Serbian response to the demands. He says, "It is a capitulation of the humiliated kind. Reason for war is removed. I am ready to mediate for peace." Wilhelm held out for peace so long that he actually pissed off the aforementioned Helmut von Moltke, who had a mental breakdown at the fact that the Kaiser actually didn't want to go to war. Austria very naively thought this war would be confined only to the Balkans and just Serbia. They did not think Russia nor France would be involved, but as we mentioned, that they are very, very much involved. The French and the Russians held secret preparations for war against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and specifically Germany, before the demands were even presented by Austria to Serbia. They ensured that their war goals were met, and they started planning and to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine. And the hawkishness of these war councils were so bad that René Viviani, who was the prime minister, had a full-on mental breakdown during his time in Russia about it. So I think by now you might realize that I'm actually team 100% Central Powers. I'm team Kaiser. And after reading this book, I think that Austria was 100% justified in their invasion of Serbia. I believe that Germany kind of had its hand forced, albeit with them also having their hawkishness of their own. I believe that France and Russia were a little bit too overzealous in the lead up to the war, and Britain, actually playing their power politics, realized it would be better long-term to side with France and Russia than with Germany and Austria. So this is very far away from the defense of democracy that I originally thought this war was about, and that many of you likely do. It's clear from this book that the people who were leading these countries really were sleepwalking into the First World War. They didn't realize what they were doing. Each kind of decision was informed off of their own anxieties, informed off of their own prejudices against the countries and the people around them. And everyone had their goals before this war broke out, and they kind of fatalistically said that there's nothing we can do, time to go to war. And that's very sad. But anyways, the First World War is kind of like the big catalyst to the 21st and 20th centuries, causing everything to happen. And it's such a compelling and emotionally impactful read. So I recommend that, and I appreciate you guys for checking out this video about it.